Hello, hi everybody. Woo! Welcome. Don't be too excited. I know it's been a long conference. Hopefully you've had a great experience. I know I have. So hi, I'm Brian Benson. I'm the Senior Vice President at MedTech Innovator. And I am pleased to be here today. It's been an amazing conference. I want to thank AHA for putting on an amazing event. Thank you. I know it's not easy. It's millions of pavilions, it seems like, and floors of conference activity, but it's been great. So thank you all, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. MedTech Innovator is the world's largest accelerator for medical devices, and we've been about over 10 years, almost 12 now, a decade plus of supporting innovation with a commitment to accelerating transformative technologies that have the potential to impact and improve patient care around the world. So it's been an amazing ride here, and I think we have some slides. I think I have a clicker. Maybe it works. There we go. So that's the world's largest accelerator. There you go. That helps. So as I was mentioning, again, world's largest accelerator, committed to supporting transformative technologies, really to reach patients that need them most faster. There we go. Oh, went too far. So by largest, I mean not only in scale, but in impact. As you can see here, of the 800 plus alumni that have gone through our program and have graduated out of MedTech Innovator, we have seen a huge impact in the care and patient activity around the world, and in particular, bringing over 500 plus products to the market through FDA approvals. 93% of our old portfolio is still active. So again, over that 12 plus years, the startup rate is very low. If you think of a restaurant, think a little bit worse than restaurants, and that's the average success rate of startups. And so 93% is very telling. We have spent a lot of time cultivating that, but also helping these companies identify and accelerate their process without making the same mistakes many others have. The one thing that is not on here that I always like to say is these companies are so active that they represent a majority of the investment in all medtech, in the way that $1 in $4 in all that was invested in all of medtech over the last year was invested in our alumni. So these companies are highly active. They're not just keeping the lights on. They are really moving the needle, even in times of downturn. So companies, something to consider. It's not always a rainy day as part of MedTech Innovator. How do we help the companies do that? We have a truly differentiated process through our rigorous programming and structure that we've developed to really define our evidence-based training process and support. To do that, we really curate a tailored program for each company. We assess their needs, we identify the right mentors, we develop a curriculum to support them throughout the continuum of their growth, really towards a key value inflection point, bring in our unique ecosystem of investors, strategic partners, and clinicians, as well as service providers, to support them in a variety of needs throughout the program of the 4-month virtual process. And really, again, access to entrepreneurs that can help them through these times of struggle, or even share some of the pain points throughout the process. So it's an amazing ecosystem that we've built to support these companies, and it's more than just one part, and it's never enough money, so that's why we build the ecosystem to support them through that continuum. How do we assess them or identify the companies? We really have a unique way to identify the most promising companies from around the world. This year, we had over 1,500, almost 1,500 companies apply to MedTech Innovator. From that, about 15% were invited to pitch in person. And from that, we then select 65 companies to participate in our cohort. Now, this is the most selective and most curated portfolio of innovation impacting healthcare today, and something that be a testament to the companies that are here. They made it through a pretty long and rigorous process to assess that, but really to also identify how best to support them throughout their journey. And as I mentioned, the assessment part, it's not just us at MedTech Innovator. It's in partnership with some of the leading organizations in the MedTech space to help us identify, validate, and mentor these companies towards successful goals, and ideally towards the patients that can benefit from them the most. So this really is the key linchpin of MedTech Innovator. These partners are not just financially contributing, but participating on every level of the program. And in particular, it led us to identify areas of need and to deepen our engagement in a particular thematic area, which helped us launch a specialty track program. And last year was our first year doing that with AHA, and we launched the Heart and Brain Health Accelerator track. We identified 5 companies in the program, and really was an impressive impact in partnership with AHA to maximize our programming in addition to their expertise, clinical guidance, and advisory members. And this year, we've expanded that relationship to 8 companies, and it's been an amazing journey to get here. So I just want to highlight a little bit and also kind of show the process to get here, very similar to, as I mentioned, our overall program track. But we had about 430 companies apply. Of those, about 85 companies went on the further diligence. From that, we then picked 12 companies to pitch and 8 companies in the cohort, as you saw in that earlier slide. In partnership with AHA, bring in their mentors and advisors, clinicians, and experts to help us evaluate these companies, in addition to our partners, investors, and a variety of other industry experts to help us assess these companies. And you can see some of the highlights here, and the big group during our pitch event at the top of that slide. It takes a large number of people. Those are just the judges. Just so you know, those aren't any companies up there. It's impressive how many people we get to help us assess these companies, and it takes a village. So to get there, it starts today. So if you are a company that's looking for help, that needs guidance, that could benefit from this program, our applications are open. So do take a screenshot, apply. If you think you're too early, apply. If you think you're too late, apply. We see companies from across the board, from seed stage, $250,000 and an idea with some validation, all the way up to companies that have $45 million in funding and have products on the market. So definitely apply. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our cohort and let them tell you a little bit about the amazing work that they're doing. And before we do that, I just wanted to thank AHA, the Ventures team, for partnering with us over this past 2 years, and we're really excited to continue that in the coming years. And again, thanks for bringing your expertise, wrangling some amazing professionals to support this program. And it's been an honor and a pleasure, and hopefully the companies express the same. But with that, I'd like to bring up Georgie from Kelvin.
Hello everybody, I'm Georgi from Kelvin Health. The mission of Kelvin Health is actually to tackle 2 major problems. One of them is that the amputation rate of critical limb ischemia patients that have never received any vascular intervention is more than 70%. And the second one is that a huge part of the population that escalates to a critical limb ischemia, the patients with PAD, are not actually diagnosed on time because they're asymptomatic. In 2018, my father-in-law heard that he might either have to get his both legs amputated or lose his life. And my wife and I were devastated. We were just expecting our first son back then. And unfortunately, he's just one of more than 200 million people with PAD worldwide. That because of the hard access to diagnostics and the late diagnostics escalate to critical limb ischemia. Annually, more than 20 million people, more than the average population of a whole European country, or locally here, than the state of Florida, develop this very hideous condition that unfortunately first takes your limb and then still is very likely to kill you in less than 5 years. So the problem lays into multiple aspects, and one of them is the hard access to specialists, or not enough specialists that can do these diagnostics on time. The other is in the lack of precise enough diagnostic methods that can enable wide enough screening. So what we basically figured out as another aspect of the problem, especially in the context of the American Heart Association track this year, is the problematic aspect of diagnosing women on time. They're way less screened. 44% more women than men are actually not presenting symptoms and be diagnosed on time. There's some stigma about diagnostics. There are some biological specifics that are not calibrated when we screen people for PAD. Most of the research has been done on male patients. So all these combined basically leads to a very hard access to early screening of women. The diagnostic process that we offer is actually using a thermal camera like this one, very portable, and then we do analysis of the thermal images to segment the legs in different thermal zones that correspond with the arterial zones of the legs, and then evaluate the level of perfusion in each of those zones. So the process is basically taking 5 thermal images of the legs from different perspectives and then correlating these images with the actual results from the traditional standard of care examination methods. We repeated this process for more than 2,600 patients, mostly based in Europe, with the team of our medical director, Professor Petrov. We collected more than 18,000 as of today thermograms and trained machine learning models that can quite precisely evaluate the PAD status of the patient in the context of the different arterial zones they have. So we saw many examples where the current standard of care is not giving fast enough or precise enough results, even with human reading, like this very dramatic example of a patient with severe ischemia on both of their legs that were not diagnosed properly to multiple sessions of Doppler ultrasound. And just because of this thermal image, while still in research phase, were escalated to X-ray angiography and were basically scheduled for angiography and then stenting. We see blood flow problems of the aorta that leads to Lariche syndrome that is very easily visible on thermography. We see cases of not just the territory of the legs, but let's say the territory of the hands in this case, the upper limbs. We have finger ischemia that is so visible using thermography. And something that actually our medical team escalated their own interest towards was the application toward carotid arteries hypoperfusion, and we saw that different forms of facial ischemia can also be quite visible using the approach of thermography. So the ultimate goal, as I briefly mentioned in the beginning, is to provide much wider screening and more accessible screening that saves time and eventually is not operator dependent, can be used to do screening in the context of both primary care and rapid triage in the context of secondary and specialty care, and ultimately something that can save the limbs and lives of the patient through the more timely diagnostics. In the context of the Go Red for Women and Research Go Red initiatives, we have the aspect that PAD is actually can be researched in an equitable way for both men and women without any stigma, without any operator interpretation because of the application of AI. And also we try to keep the data set representative of what's the current diagnostics in terms of prevalence between the two genders. We have more than 30% females. We believe in the potential of thermography to actually be used as some kind of tool that can inform very unbiased research for PAD and women in the very near future. So the applications of the technology are in multiple aspects. One of them is in primary care, another is in secondary care. We saw very strong interest from US healthcare professionals and some centers that we started to approach and eventually engage in our future clinical validation here in the US about the application in primary care as a wide screening method, and that's why one of the main messages we have is in that direction. We published multiple peer-reviewed papers and presented at multiple scientific conferences in the last year. And something that's actually quite on a positive note since this year is the lot of legislative initiatives in the US that start to favor PAD screening again after multiple years of basically drought and no screening. So in a conclusion, we had a very complex map of all the things that we want to achieve in the next couple of years. And the MedTech Innovator program and the AHA track of it actually helped us to narrow down this to a set of very particular steps, actually most of them starting here at the AHA, where we're able to reconnect with some of our potential clinical partners, expand our clinical network, and kind of put the pieces of the market access puzzle together, or at least starting to put those pieces together in the last 3-4 months of the program. So what's current for us, we experiment with different form of hardware, not just this one, and we are mapping finally our reimbursement strategy. Then we are very open, and this is also a conversation that started last year at the AHA with multiple of our clinical partners to different grant funding research opportunities. So in a conclusion, if a solution like ours was available 8 years ago, the legs of my father-in-law wouldn't have been at risk, as he would have access to something that's enabling diagnostics even at his family doctor in a very short period of time and with a quite high level of precision. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have in the following minute.
Right. Any questions? You can come up to the mic. I know there's a lot of questions. How can you give them money? Who to write the check to? No? I think one thing I'll ask in the interim, while I think maybe we get a question or two coming on down, what were the key learnings from the clinical advisors that you've received to help kind of redirect or maybe refine how you're targeting the key endpoints or targeting endpoints to help validate the accuracy and benefit of the process and technology you've developed?
Yeah, so we had multiple epiphanies during the program. Maybe the simplistic one of them, but that got so etched into our minds, was go talk with the FDA as soon as possible. They're your best consultant on regulatory matters, and just start a FDA pre-submission process. That's why this is one of the main things that we are currently focusing on. Another one was, saving patients is good, but if we need to be a little bit more pragmatic and cynical to a certain extent, make sure to understand the different driving forces of the different stakeholders in the healthcare system. So understanding the dynamics between wider screening and how this escalates to referrals to specialists, for example. One of the findings, or one of the conclusions we made out of that, was to think about integrated healthcare systems as much as possible, because for them there's also economic interest to save from complications by doing wider screening. And we had a lot of peer, I think this is one of the super valuable aspects of the program, both formally and informally. We had a lot of exchange with the other fellow companies. We built good friendships, but also exchange a lot of information, contacts, and approaches to things.
Great job. Go ahead.
Thank you for a good talk. Have you looked at your results or your measurement outcome? Does it provide any information related to its severity of impaired wound healing or peripheral neuropathy that also comes with PAD and maybe concomitant?
It brings the potential, but we haven't done any such kind of correlation or research yet. As a first-time MedTech entrepreneurs, we decided to just focus a lot on validating the case for PAD and its escalation to COTI, but thermography in practice has a lot of potential to anything related to inflammation or some blockage of the blood flow.
Thank you.
So happy to keep the conversation going about that.
Hi,
Hey.
fascinating work. Thank you so much for presenting. I just had a question about validity regarding seasonal temperature and or just room temperature in terms of thinking about how this can apply in different case scenarios for different individuals who may have differences in core temperature as well.
Yeah, thank you. Again, a very thoughtful question. So we have a specific protocol how patients should be taken a thermal photos of to increase the likelihood of getting the right results. At the same time, the methods that we use for analysis are very much based on relative temperature. So let's say if the whole body temperature is somehow offset, this wouldn't make a huge change in the results. Still, if you have, let's say, a physical activity or something else that do certain type of redistribution of blood or does some kind of cooling effects of the body, this might be a problem for the precision. That's why we typically advise for at least 15 minutes of no active physical activity before that. But in terms of environment, as long as there is nothing that is heating in the actual frame where you take the picture, like let's say there's a heater here and they take a photo of my legs in front of it, It's quite robust currently in the way how we've designed our algorithms.
Great,
But again, happy to keep the conversation going.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this might be a bit of an early question, but great presentation. I've
Thank
lived
you.
in areas where you see people that are missing a foot, or people have amputations pretty frequently due to diabetes. But I'm wondering, is the idea for this service or product that a person at risk would buy this for themselves and then take their own photos, or their primary care provider would tell them, or would it be a specialist? And how would this potentially be addressed with underserved areas where people might not see a doctor very frequently?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Actually, this was one of the major missionary aspects that we envisioned to provide this in a very context agnostic manner, especially for vascular deserts or territories where you don't have access to vascular specialists. So both three contexts of having this at the vascular specialist for rapid triage, having this at the primary care professional for wider screening, and having this in a more rural environment, even without specialists. This is the hardest though in terms of regulatory claims and in terms of validation, but we still have in the mid-long term the vision to enable the patients themselves to have this at home or in some kind of a village or city town hall or in CVS booth or something to have access that you can do this initial ultra-early screening for PAD just by using the software and the solution that's combines software and hardware. So the idea is literally to be as widespread as possible without the need of a trained professional who takes the photo. Maybe the user buying this wouldn't be required because you don't need to check yourself every other day or something. But let's say once in a month to receive this in a box or to go to a CVS pharmacy store. We still haven't deeply thought about the logistics of it, but from a technical perspective, this is very possible scenario, or at least probable, maybe not probable at first, but very possible scenario to empower the patient themselves or the potential patient to get screened on time.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. That's
Thank you.
Kelvin. Again, they'll be sitting down here for additional questions with all the companies. So do stick around if you want to ask some follow-up questions. But Gordy, thank you. You can go sit down.
Yep.
And then we'll bring up our next company from LightHearted. Come on down, Lou.
Hi everybody. So today I'll talk to you about our company that's using photonics to unlock timely cardiac care. And the first condition that we're trying to bring to market is for heart valve disease detection, and in particular aortic stenosis, which is one heart valve disease, one of the many heart valve diseases. Heart valve disease affects 30 million people worldwide. In the US, 60,000 patients die every year because of this condition. It's deadly but treatable if caught in time, but often it is not caught in time. In fact, 40% of patients get their first diagnosis in the emergency room. At this point, they already have heart failure, and we are headquartered in the UK. We did a Freedom of Information Act, and across the UK, we saw that women die twice more than men. And when we presented this data to the hospitals from which we got this data from, they were actually surprised by what we were showing them. There are several reasons for this. We did literature review reports to try to understand, for example, why women were dying twice more than men. Some of the reasons were we were lacking appropriate tools to detect these conditions in time at the early stages of the disease onset. And also because the guidelines were very heavily male-specific, male-centered. So what this leads to is hundreds of thousands of patients being eligible for treatment that don't receive it. And that was what was happening before. And now the FDA, just this year, after the 10 years trial from Edwards and Medtronic and the results for early intervention, so the FDA changed the guidelines after those trials, and even the European Society of Cardiology. And now we want to treat asymptomatic severe and moderate patients. And these are patients, we were not even treating the severe symptomatic. We were not even detecting those. So now we suddenly have to find this additional set of patients, and what we want to do is to help find this new patients through a device that can enable this in the community. So what we do is we shine a laser at someone's neck, and very accurately we pick up biomarkers with an unprecedented accuracy, because we pick up heart sounds, ECG, blood pressure, all from just a 10 seconds acquisition, non-contact from the laser scan on the neck, and then we have run clinical trials to build AI models on top of this data. This kind of research this device comes from many years of research, first of all at the University of Glasgow. We have several papers published, and it was the topic of my PhD. And then we also have other experts. My co-founder was the first employee at the MedTech Innovator company that scaled now to 100 patients. And we now assembled a team of technical, operational, and clinical expertise, and also advisors that can guide us through the right process for setting up clinical trials and getting the right evidence to show clinicians. So the first trial we did, obviously it's like the safety trial. That was 35 patients, and we showed very high sensitivity and specificity. And then actually we are now doing a 3,000 patients clinical trial. So after the first one, we are now doing a 3,000 patients one. And some of the things we are now validating is to look more deeply into the data. And what we found is, for example, that our data is much more accurate than stethoscope data. At the top, you can see our data, and at the bottom, you can see the digital stethoscope data. We get much higher, cleaner data, but also we get higher frequency biomarkers that the stethoscope is just not capturing, which we're showing are necessary to pick up the disease at an earlier stage of the onset. And what we also found is two things through this 3,000 patients trial. One, women have higher frequency biomarkers compared to men, and that we validated this. And second, that the digital stethoscopes do not pick up this higher frequency biomarker, so they're missing the illness signature in women. This is what we validated with our new trials. We're also more broadly very inclusive, because our signal is very high quality across all skin tones, and we made sure that this was represented. And also, we compared to digital stethoscope, for example, our data contains no noise. So even in when we have patients with murmurs, we can show here that our data does not contain noise, whilst the digital stethoscope picks up a lot of noise. We are 8 months away from CE marking in the UK, and then we are deploying there across several institutions. And then in the US, we have partnerships with primary care centers that then will send the patients to get tested in secondary care centers. So we want to increase the funnels of patients that actually gets in. And we also have a lot of other disease conditions that we are testing for in our trials that we will be able to deploy into, as a suite of products into our platform. So yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to take questions.
All right. So if you have questions, come on down. Like to know more about the technology, the trial, don't be scared. I see people looking around. So maybe I'll start us off, so then we'll give everybody a chance to digest. But what was the epiphany when you realized that women had higher frequency biomarkers? Was it a thought that you had in the initial outset of the study, or through the data analysis it kind of came to light, or it was preset, you thought there was going to be some variance and that's why they're being missed so frequently?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, because when we started the trials in the laboratory, we kept seeing that we had a much better signal from women with our device compared with stethoscopes, and we could not understand why that was the case, if there was any error. And then eventually, after taking more data and generalizing it across the population, we saw that wasn't a mistake of the lab. That was actually the woman did exhibit these higher frequency heart sounds, and that was very interesting because it was not known before that.
Awesome. Okay, any questions? I've got maybe one more I'll ask, and then I'll make you ask a question. But As far as kind of where you are currently, I mean, the technology is very non-invasive. It's kind of seems very easy to use. Can you kind of elaborate on where you are with, how this would be deployed and what type of settings this could be used in beyond kind of the clinical settings?
Yeah, so for example, we are just showcasing our technology over there with Higi, which is this healthcare cabin that you can find in retail centers in the US. That's such an easy way for patients to get access to healthcare, especially because in the US, 70 million people do not have access to a primary care physician, so that's easy then to miss patients. We're doing the same things in Europe, and otherwise we want to be in standard clinics, like in primary care networks, in waiting rooms of your general physician. So we're trying to fit both models to try to be where the patients are.
All right.
Could you speak a little bit about the skin tones that you mentioned? Because I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when you use light to capture data, you clearly always have a problem. Obviously, like different skin tones reflect different amount of light. So that's why when we built post-processing algorithms, we made sure to adjust for this different skin tone, reflectivity issues to ensure that we get the same data from all patients. Usually, for example, if you might have seen it, the news saying, is your Apple Watch racist? Because it actually picks up the intensity of the light that's captured from your wrist. We do not use that, like intensity, as one of our parameters, so we are very much less affected by that kind of issue, but we still made sure to look at it and ensure that it wasn't that we weren't biased in that anyways.
All right. Well, thank you. LightHearted, amazing. At your CVS soon, it sounds like. So great work. Okay. All right. Next up, we have Powerful Medical. Come on, Michael. And again, get your questions ready. Don't be shy. Michael.
Perfect. Thank you also for the chance to speak here. And over the past few years, we have seen many examples of AI applications presented at main arenas and podiums. Yet only very few of these can actually be put to work by a physician on the Monday morning. Today I want to present an example of AI in cardiology that can be used on a device that all of you already carry, and that's a smartphone. Perfect. So let's start with two cases. Both of these patients present to the emergency department with chest pain, and the question is simple. Which of these patients needs a STEMI activation? So I'll pause here for a couple of seconds. If we review the guidelines to pretty much identify, if we review the guidelines, they tell us to look at the level of ST segment elevation in order to identify patients that will benefit from reperfusion therapy. And so looking at patient number 1, they had a worrying ECG, ST segment elevation in inferior leads, Q waves, also biphasic T wave in V2. And this patient was brought into a cath lab, but ended up having clean coronaries. In fact, this patient caused 7 different false positive activations of the cath lab in the course of the last 10 years. But this is just their baseline EKG, a normal variant. Unfortunately, patient number 2 was not that lucky. Patient arrested before making it to the cath lab, and the pre-cath lab ECG already tells a completely different story. And not surprisingly, the patient ended up having a completely occluded proximal LAD affecting a large territory. And these two patients greatly illustrate the challenges that we face today in the management of STEMI patients. On one hand, we have about 15 to 30% of cath lab activations due to presumed STEMI as false positives, due to conditions like patient number 1 or others. And on the other hand, and clinically even more important, roughly 40% of STEMI patients have a STEMI equivalent on their index ECG, which makes it much harder for the frontline to identify these patients and direct them into a primary PCI center. Finally, a large study in JAMA a couple of years ago looked at the proportion of patients, of STEMI patients, arriving to non-PCI centers that have delays in reperfusion therapy. And the results were that 6 out of 7 STEMI patients experience delays when they come to a non-PCI center. That's quite worrying. So to address this, we developed an AI model trained specifically to identify STEMI and STEMI equivalents from a 12-lead ECG. We trained it on 2.5 million ECGs paired with angiographic outcomes. And the beauty of deep learning is that you don't specify the model to only look at a certain part of the EKG, but the model is so complex that it identifies much more complex patterns which would be probably impossible to detect by a human eye. So we developed this model. It's called the Queen of Hearts, and it's able to detect these STEMI and STEMI equivalents in a matter of seconds. The workflow is very simple. The way it works, you just scan a picture of a 12-lead ECG with your smartphone, or you have the data digitally ingested if it's already available. You get the results within a couple of seconds, and then you review the AI explainability, which pretty much highlights which parts of the ECG were most relevant for the model when it was deciding. Finally, you can also take it a step beyond that, and you can actually do the whole care coordination part through the platform and alert the interventional cardiologist in the primary PCI center that you have a patient who requires immediate intervention. So what we're pretty much building are these novel STEMI networks where we're connecting all of the stakeholders in the management of STEMI patients onto one platform, so be it paramedics, be it interventional cardiologists in the primary PCI center, but also emergency physicians in the spokes and in the hubs, onto PM Cardio so that they can notify the right people at the right time and pretty much streamline care. This is how it works in practice. The device is already approved for clinical use in Europe. This is a real patient from a hospital in Belgium that's using it for the past 2 years. This is a 61-year-old male who called an ambulance at 1 a.m. in the morning with chest pain. And because the system already integrated PM Cardio in their workflow, all they have to do is pretty much just press a button on the defibrillator, and the ECG gets transmitted to PM Cardio, which evaluated this as a STEMI. They alerted the interventional cardiologist, and the patient was brought into the primary PCI center. The ECG 35 minutes later is already a clear STEMI, but this does not always happen, so it not always evolves into a full-blown STEMI. And 54 minutes after first medical contact, angiography found this outcome. So the patient had a mid-LAD occlusion affecting a large territory, which was treated, achieved thimetry flow, and with a good outcome. If we pretty much compare the two workflows, so the traditional workflow, what would likely happen with this patient? They would be treated as an NSTEMI at the first medical contact, would be driven to a spoke center, so non-PCI center, and only after serial troponins or serial ECGs, the patient would be then ultimately transmitted as a STEMI activation into primary PCI center. And this whole part of the workflow, we were pretty much able to omit with PM Cardio and thus achieve a fantastic result of 54 minutes door-to-balloon time at 1 a.m. in the morning with a non-clear-cut STEMI ECG. We're extensively studying this in various different patient populations and geographies. This was a late-breaking science presentation presented by Dr. Tim Henry at TCT last week in San Francisco. This was a multicentric study from the US, from 3 different sites, so Beth Israel in Boston, UC Davis, California, and Memorial Hermann in Texas. And we pretty much look at the ability of the model, of the AI model, to identify patients, so identify STEMI patients already at the index ECG. We had a much greater sensitivity, so we are able to detect more patients already on the basis of the first EKG, but also a much higher specificity. So we're actually able to reduce the number of false positive activations by 4-fold. And this currently is a great burden to the US hospital systems. What is also interesting, the mean door-to-balloon time in patients that were missed by the standard of care on the level of the index ECG, but identified by the AI on the index ECG was 364 minutes, so 6 hours. That's a time when pretty much the myocardium already starts to die and already creates a lot of damage. We're also doing RCTs, so we had the first result, the secondary endpoints from an RCT running in Turkey presented at TCT. For the primary endpoints, which are 1 year all-cause mortality, we still need to wait because patient enrollment only ended in the summer this year. But the early results from the secondary endpoints hint at good outcomes and at a positive trial. So stay tuned, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right. Come on down if you have any quick questions. I know somebody does. So when you're talking about time to care, you know, the 6 hours was the alternate if they weren't going through a process like yours and identifying it earlier and directing them to the right center right away, as opposed to kind of getting redirected after a period of time. What's the cost, besides obviously the health implications, what's the cost to the healthcare system, or how are you, I guess, differentiating yourself to drive also value, not only in care, but in, you know, financial dollars to the system?
Absolutely, very, very good question. First of all, having a patient in the emergency department is very expensive. So if they have to stay longer there and have many tests done, this of course costs a lot of money to the system. Second of all, if you drive initially the patient to a non-primary PCI center, so to the spoke center, and then you have to do this sort of secondary transfer to drive them from there in these 6 hours, 5 hours, or the next day to the primary PCI center. This, of course, also creates a lot of burden. We're working with many sites in the US to also look at health economic endpoints. So we'll have more data available on this.
Great model. Great talk. Just one question I had. My understanding is this is sort of prioritizing end STEMIs to go straight to the cath lab. And I'm curious what your team's philosophy is regarding kind of maximizing sensitivity but minimizing false positives.
Great question. Yes, so pretty much what we do is we identify STEMIs and we identify the so-called STEMI equivalents, which are pretty much the high-risk non-STEMI where we believe there is still a coronary occlusion, so the same pathology as in STEMIs. And sorry, your second question?
Just because, like, what threshold you set essentially for the STEMI equivalent?
Yes. So we iterated this model many times. The initial one, the feedback was from early users that specificity could be higher because that's mostly what they care about. So in this version, what we did is we pretty much set a specificity fixed at 99%, and we just try to maximize sensitivity. But it's always hard to balance these two aspects because, of course, you don't want false positive activations, but at the same time, you want to identify as many patients from the cohort as possible.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Powerful. Great job. Again, I'll be in the front later on. So next up, come on down. We have Reach.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Powell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Reach Neuro, and I'm going to tell you about how we're building a device to help people who have had a stroke recover the ability to move again. First, I want to show you the first participants in a clinical study that we ran out of the University of Pittsburgh and UPMC. This is Heather, and she had her stroke 9 years prior to this video. What you're seeing here is her day-to-day level of deficit. So she doesn't have full range of motion in her wrist or her elbow. She doesn't have full strength in her hand. And ultimately, this means that she can't actually complete this task without assistance from her other hand. Unfortunately, this is really representative of a lot of people in the US. There's about 7 million people who are living with chronic disability as a result of stroke today. And these are individuals who have tried rehab. They go through the traditional rehab pathway. Usually after about 3 to 6 months, they'll plateau. And at that point, they're considered chronic stroke patients. Our aim is to help them. So how are we doing this? We do this by delivering precise electrical stimulation to the spinal cord. We implant 2 electrode arrays with 8 electrodes each in the cervical spine spanning spinal segment C4 to T1. That gives us full coverage of all the muscles that innervate the arm and hand specifically. And we stimulate very selectively. So the goal here is to help a patient be able to restore volitional control of movement. So instead of forcing muscles to move, the goal of the stimulation is to allow the brain to take back control of that movement naturally. So for the patients, this is as if they're controlling their arm again from before the stroke. The idea of the stimulation is that it's helping to effectively amplify the residual signal coming from the brain. So that signal has been weakened by the stroke, and the result of the stimulation is that it's now more effective at recruiting muscle activity compared to before. Some of you who are in the stroke space may already be aware of other approaches to helping chronic stroke patients, specifically vagal nerve stimulation. The Vivastim product has been on the market now for about 2 years. And compared to that product, we're the only technology that's demonstrated a direct restorative effect of stimulation. So you turn the stimulation on, and that person can perform movements that they couldn't do before. We're also the only therapy to show both improvements in motor control and a reduction in spasticity in those same muscles, making Reach truly a unique product in this space. The market is a large market. Taking that 7 million number that I gave at the beginning of the presentation, about 1/3 of all chronic stroke patients would be the most eligible for our therapy. That represents a market size of about 140,000 patients per year in the US, and about 2.5 million patients that are currently living with chronic disability as a result of stroke. Just to put this in perspective, this would be 2 to 3 times the size of the largest neuromodulation market today, which is chronic pain, making this truly transformative for the neuromodulation space. Reach has a strong patent portfolio. We have 7 patents making their way through the prosecution process, 3 of them granted. And this is covering a range of different aspects of our system, from both a method of applying stimulation to help produce restoration of movement, as well as the peripheral technologies that we're building around this system to make it easier to implement and more accessible for patients. Where we are today. So as I showed in that video, we have done a clinical study. So far, we've done a clinical proof of concept in 7 participants as part of an acute clinical study. The next step for the company is we're currently raising a $5 million seed round. This will fund some algorithm development work to automate the programming process for stimulation, which is the most non-trivial aspect of implementing the therapy. Upon completion of that, we'll be building this into our overall system and seeking FDA approval with a PMA approval in late 2029. As I mentioned, we're raising a $5 million seed round at the moment. This is going primarily towards technology development, but in parallel to that, we do have non-dilutive funding from the NIH to fund a 10-patient chronic clinical study that will be starting in January of next year. And this will be a chronic study, so we'll be following patients for 2 years, seeing how the therapy, when it's fully implanted and they can use it at home, helps them. Quickly, just to brag about our team, you've seen me. Our co-founding team is the top 4 individuals on this slide. It's a group of key opinion leaders in the fields of neuroscience, neuroengineering, and neurosurgery. And we've supplemented that team with a range of industry experts that are very experienced in the space of neuromodulation, working at groups like Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston Scientific. Finally, I want to leave you all with this video here. So on the left is the same video I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, but now on the right with our stimulation actually turned on. So with that, I'll leave you with this video, and thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to taking your questions.
All right. Questions? No? That was pretty impressive at the end, right? You doing clearly works.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of technologies in the STEM space, a lot of challenges in implementation and kind of commercialization. Maybe you can elaborate on why you've identified the unique approach that you think is going to get to market and actually improve these patients, as you've seen at the last of that slide.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different approaches that people have tried for this. I come from a neuroengineering space, so I think of this in terms of the nervous system and how we can approach that. There are individuals taking it from the perspective of the brain, some from the periphery, stimulating muscles directly. But for us, the spinal cord really makes the most sense because it combines a really nice mix of being low enough level that we can be really selective with our stimulation. So we can turn on stimulation to sort of turn up the volume, so to speak, on individual muscles if we want to, or if we need to, and we do that. But it's also a high enough level of complexity where we can take some of the niceties of the nervous system, primarily the fact that the spinal cord already integrates a combination of sort of inhibiting muscles that are antagonistic to movement and exciting muscles that are agonistic to movement. We can leverage those built-in circuits and that complexity within the spinal cord that's not possible at any other level of the nervous system, which is why we thought the spinal cord made the most sense in this case.
Other questions? Is there anything that you need these people to do? What can we get them to help you with? I know you mentioned you got funding, you have your pilot underway for the clinical trial coming up, but
Yeah, so one of our biggest hurdles ahead of us is to really fully understand the referral pathway of a technology like this. There are going to be a lot of stakeholders involved in actually implementing the therapy. There's going to be a surgeon who may be a pain management doctor, because a lot of them can place spinal stimulators today. They may be a neurosurgeon. And that patient will need to get handed off from that neurosurgeon onto a kind of a stroke care pathway, either a stroke neurologist or physiatrist that can handle post-implant care for that patient. So, from this community in particular, these are individuals, you're all individuals with a lot of background in either heart health or stroke specifically, and understanding from your particular perspective what that might look like in your healthcare system. We are looking for sort of market feedback in that respect to understand how best we can reach patients with the therapy.
awesome. Well, thank you, Reach Neuro. Good segue, Mark. And we'll have our next company come up. Not next, last but not least. We'll have their slide come up. Sync Neuro.